Hi, this is Freedom versus Liberty, discussion number 2. My name is Sharon Saylor. I would like to start today by asking you an opening question. What is the difference between freedom and liberty? Now, a lot of times we use these words interchangeably. However, there is a major philosophical difference between the two terms, as we will see with this presentation. Dr. Kerry Roberts describes the difference by looking at the etymology of the word. He defines freedom, a Germanic word, as being a neighbor or neighborly, while liberty, a Mediterranean word and the Latin word libertas, refers to a set definition of rights and corresponding duties. According to Alexander Rosenthal Pubel, the classical Greek philosophy on this matter is that freedom is rational self-government, the ability to act according to one's rational judgment without bondage either to external coercion, to the compulsive force exerted by irrational desires and passions. Hot question number 1. What do you think this quotation means? Pause and reflect. Now, for me, this means that one must exhibit rational desires or fall victim to a negative conception of freedom. It doesn't mean that one can do whatever he pleases whenever he wants. Giving in to our cravings makes us slaves, not free men. Other classical views comes from Memorabilia and the Plato's Republic, wherein they explain Socrates' view. Socrates argues that to be free means to follow virtue and the good. He asks, is it better to be just and suffer the consequences of injustice than to be unjust and receive the rewards of justice? He exclaims that the tyrant and the evil person are the least free of all. Hot question number 2. Why is the tyrant the least free? Pause the video and reflect. Perhaps the tyrant is chained by his desires for power. Basically, the ancient philosophers believed that freedom and virtue go together, and self-control is the foundation of all virtue. Aristotle argues in his book, Ethics, that the free man acts without compulsion, but also in accord with right reasons. Hot question number 3. What is right reason? Pause the video and reflect. Now, Thucydides implicitly describes the difference between freedom and liberty when he writes, we are free and tolerant in our private lives, but in public affairs, we keep to the law. Hot question number 4. Are we completely free in our private lives? In other words, does what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? Pause and reflect. Aristotle would have said no. He would argue that even freedom in our private lives does not mean that we can live any way we want just to get a desired end, but the ability to order one's life towards the end apprehended by right reason. This goes back to having the right mindset. Your desires must be virtuous and mindful of others. This reminds me of the opening statement by Dr. Kerry Roberts, being a neighbor. When I was a child, my dad, I would ask him a question, if I'm free, why can't I just do whatever I want? Plato asked the same question. Has not every man license to do whatever he wants? My father always told me 2 things. First, he would say, your rights end at your nose. Secondly, he would say that your rights end when someone else's begins. Hot question number 5. What do you think he meant by these 2 statements? Pause and reflect. Edmund Burke sums it up best when he says, men are qualified for civil liberty in exact proportion to their disposition to put moral chains upon their appetites. Society cannot exist unless a controlling power upon will and appetite be placed somewhere, and the less there is within, the more there must be without. What a beautiful statement. Freedom, he says, must be controlled either intrinsically, within ourselves, maybe with religion, or controlled extrinsically by the law, which then becomes liberty. Let's examine 2 primary sources. The first is Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Pause the video and read chapter 13 of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Now let's examine the first sentence. Hereby it is manifest that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war. Man against every man. What does Hobbes mean by a common power? Obviously, he believes that man must be controlled, or in the state of nature will constantly be in warfare. Man's idea of a freedom is naturally negative freedom, he believes. A freedom when someone seeks their desires and cravings with no regard for their neighbors, virtue, or reason. Pause and read the second paragraph. Let's focus on the last sentence. And the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes believes that without external constraints, man will not be able to have art, society, knowledge, etc. Life would be a fight for desires. Now let's examine the second primary source, the Magna Carta. Pause and read these three excerpts. Now let's focus on the third excerpt. It says, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. Liberty means we have rights, but also duties. Our duties include following the law, serving on juries, voting, not being free to do anything we want. Let's examine the first excerpt. This should remind you of Amendment number 1, but to me, it's more than just religious toleration. It's an early indication of the separation between church and state for the English people. Now, if you are interested in more scholars, I have two sources here, Isaiah Berlin and Cham Wierzbunski. Now, Wierzbunski talks about libertas having an auctor or an auctoritas, which in the Latin means a leader and authority. If we go back to the Magna Carta, who did the English want as their leader? The people. Who did they want as their authority? The law of the land. Now that is liberty. Thank you.